In this video, let's talk about why smart people often remain poor. There's a saying that goes like this. If you're so smart, why are you so poor? Most smart people stay poor because intelligence doesn't guarantee anything. To have a lot of money, you don't need to be very smart, and vice versa. Having a lot of intelligence won't get you a lot of money. Money isn't earned with intelligence. But the first point is that smart people often tend to overcomplicate things. The higher a person's intelligence, the more likely they are to analyze, consider risks, and build complex models. And instead of taking action, such people often get caught up in endless thinking, doubting, running through scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? And this paralyzes their ability to make decisions. In other words, a less intellectual person will already start taking action, while a more intellectual person will keep thinking. And as a direct result of this, they often end up with some interesting ideas, but without actually implementing them in a practical sense. And there's also the significant point that intellectual people, pure intellectuals, well, they tend to are more dependent on approval than people with a practical mindset. In what sense? They don't depend on the approval of the crowd, but they are very much dependent on the approval of their own reference group. Like my intellectual nerd friends, whom I consider my tribe, will laugh at me. And many such intellectuals grew up in systems where success is measured by correct answers, top grades, extraordinary victories in Olympiads, for example, or some exceptional achievements rather than by trial and error. Trial and error is what leads to financial success. And perfectionism guarantees financial failures. In other words, a smart person is afraid of looking stupid. And this prevents them from going through trial and error. That is, an intellectual would rather not try at all than mess up in front of others. A person who doesn't cling to this will say, what do we have to lose? We've lost things everywhere before. I say this quite often. We've lost things everywhere, so let's go lose them again. If it works out, great. If not, so what? It's not the first time. And initially, an intellectual person doesn't see money as more valuable than their pride in their own intellect. Naturally, that's why they can't make money their highest priority. For example, I noticed this in myself because I was once shocked by something my father admitted. He said the reason he never finished university was because he couldn't bring himself to take an exam unless he was sure he knew the subject better than the professor. Every subject, even things like the history of the Communist Party, which is completely useless to anyone, it's pretty hard to study at university if you try to master every subject, even the ones that, honestly, he was a physicist, a nuclear physicist, or at least tried to become one. And he felt he had to know everything better than the professor, even the history of the party. He would pore over books in libraries, knew some truly incredible details about Lenin, about the Communist Party. But why would a nuclear physicist need all that? Yet he still clung to all of it. And when I learned this about him, I made a very conscious decision that I would never do anything like that, not even back then. I ended up going too far in the other direction, focusing only on the core subjects I considered important and paying less attention, or even showing a certain disregard, for subjects I thought were unimportant, like history, management, economics. Why would I need economics or management at all? Nevertheless, intellectuals often get hung up on things that have nothing to do with practical meaning. And quite often they don't even truly think in terms of the practical, real-world meaning or implications of what they are considering. And high intelligence is absolutely not really the same thing as entrepreneurial thinking. In fact, quite often it's even at odds with entrepreneurial thinking. Guys, on my exclusive Telegram channel, I consistently share a lot of valuable and insightful things. I post a lot of diverse and thought-provoking content that genuinely helps you profoundly change your perspective, offering fresh insights and new ways of looking at the world around you. I was daddy's girl. I looked up to him as a child. When I eventually left my parents' home, I also harbored, you could certainly say, this profound intellectual complex, the deeply ingrained belief that intelligence is indeed the most paramount and significant value, and that absolutely nothing else is more important than intellectual prowess. And consequently, I was completely and utterly unprepared for the realities of life, and unprepared to solve real life problems. So if you feel like you're stuck in a single point of view, not necessarily an intellectual one, maybe even the perspective of a codependent person, I recommend you try the loving kindness meditation, which you can get for free on my Telegram channel, right here below in the pinned comment. Go ahead, take it and practice it. Because it shifts your perspective away from those viewpoints we've adopted from other people, most often from our parents. It changes the angle from which we view life so that we see it from within ourselves. In other words, when we cultivate loving kindness toward ourselves, we look at things, at facts, at events in our lives, and at the people in our lives from within ourselves, from a place of self-awareness and an awareness of our own best interests. So what is in my best interest? To sit here intellectualizing, trying to be smart and look smart for people just as smart as I am, or to actually achieve some results? That's why you should definitely take this meditation from the Telegram channel and practice it to change your perspective. From any perspective, not just an intellectual one, but any at all, from the perspective of a victim, from the perspective of codependency, from any viewpoint that doesn't serve your best interests. So entrepreneurs take action, intellectuals analyze. That's the difference. In other words, being an entrepreneur is about energy, not about knowledge. You only need to know as much as you need to know to finish the task. And I've noticed this. I recently returned to the city where I was born, and now that I'm here, my old friends and acquaintances keep saying, you know, here's some information, look at this, read this, listen to this. I tell them, there's no information. My information consumption is very strictly limited, and I can see this clearly. These people I used to hang out with, they're still stuck in this endless consumption of information, this, that, always needing more and more and more. And decades have passed, but they've accomplished very little in their lives. Over these decades, I feel like I've lived an enormous number of lives. And my conclusion from all of this is that it's very important to limit the flow of information, not expand it. The more information you have, the less you actually get done. And that's why when the time comes, yes, at first there's a stage of gathering information, then a stage of making a decision. Once you've made your plan, you need to stop consuming information. You need to put on blinders like a horse and move narrowly in that direction until you reach at least some intermediate goal. But people, intellectuals, quite often consume an excessive amount of information, so they keep changing course at every step, even at every sub-step. Let's say, for example, the path to your goal consists of 10 steps, and each step is divided into 5 sub-steps, making a total of 50 sub-steps. A person takes the first sub-step and then snap, suddenly thinks, oh, I just got some new information here and there, now I need to change everything. And so they keep constantly integrating new information over and over, and as a result, they don't get anywhere. This is how I describe this problem. You leave point A and start running around it in circles. And so you never actually reach point B. You even forget that point B exists at all. But somehow consuming information is so much fun, even though it's nothing like actually moving toward point B. The point is, an entrepreneur prioritizes money while an intellectual person idealizes intellect. An entrepreneur can be an intellectual person, but the problem here is specifically the idealization of intellect when it is put above everything else. Such a person puts the idea first and prioritizes it above all. Next point. A person's financial beliefs inherited from their family are stronger than their IQ, because parental scripts will limit a person no matter what their IQ is. And I know a lot of people with very high IQs. At the same time, their ability to make money is below zero. Precisely because there are so many scripts at play, which have nothing to do with intellect at all. For example, you are not allowed to make decisions on your own. Or, for instance, if someone tells you no, it's a catastrophe and feels like a personal rejection. And so the person simply avoids situations where they might hear no. But to build a business, to make money, you have to collect those no's like mushrooms in a basket and load them onto a cart with a pitchfork. You constantly hear no. You just throw them away and look for where you get a yes. And that's why there are so many beliefs like you have to earn money, or, for example, it's scary to be noticed because you might embarrass yourself, and you must never, under any circumstances, be embarrassed or receive disapproval. All of this really slows a person down. And the fundamental point, which is truly essential to grasp, is that knowledge in and of itself possesses absolutely no inherent value or true significance if it is not actively and consistently put into practical application. But for a person who idealizes intellect, knowledge itself is valuable and they don't care about practical application. And there's another point. A lot of people make this knowledge a source of pride. For example, my dad used to tell his women, if you don't know the laws of quantum mechanics, I have nothing to talk to you about. Well, that was his way of shutting a woman up. And that's why even when a person has certain knowledge and they have nothing else to be proud of, they try to use it as a shield against their low self-esteem, stemming from feeling their own profound lack of personal worth and value. And quite often following one's own interests and having some selfish interests like making money for oneself. Oh, that's such selfishness. It's something low, something manipulative. That's how it's perceived, just something in general. Some kind of haggling like a market vendor. I just can't do that. And often such people think that if everything is so great, my idea, my service or product, then people should just see it. I don't need to explain anything. I don't try to sell anything to anyone. They should just appreciate it right away. But the truth is, the more intellectual a person is, the harder it is for people to appreciate, or at least the harder it is for them to even understand what is actually being offered to them. And quite often, such people have no one to rely on when it comes to money. That is, quite often a person who idealizes intellect is very alone in their views. Because once again, a person who idealizes intellect, whom I call an intellectual, is not just someone with a high IQ, but someone who is in this position of idealization. That this is the only value and everything else is not valuable, not important. And look, for example, my ex-husband, by pushing off from me, stepped away from this position of his. He earned rather little. He had a business that was practically running at a loss, but in the community he was part of, he received intellectual strokes for it. Basically, people admired him, people praised him, and whether it brought in money or not, in that community, money was not valued. And so the fact that it didn't bring in money wasn't a problem for him. But then I appeared, and he had a moment of toxic masculinity, like, I won't let a woman be better than me. And so he quickly got himself together, pulled himself up, and started working in programming. Well, more accurately, he continued, because he had already done it before, sometimes working part-time during his student years. Now he returned to it, and within a year he became one of the most sought-after programmers on Upwork and started earning quite a substantial income for his work. In 2 years, he, if I remember correctly, didn't even need Upwork anymore because he had already built such a strong reputation. He became quite a prominent specialist. All of this just because he decided, I won't allow my woman to earn more than me. Just on that alone, on that one thing. In other words, not to earn money for some greater purpose, but purely for his own ego, for his own pride. That's why it's important for us to understand that just because someone is an intellectual, we don't necessarily have to listen to them. Their advice is far from always being reasonable or truly useful to us in life. Their life values might be very impractical. We can see this in the example of Sheldon Cooper from the TV series The Big Bang Theory. An intellectual, yes, but practical? No. In some situations, perhaps. Rational? No. There is a lot of irrational behavior and decision-making. So these are indeed two very different things. Being truly smart and being genuinely rich, being smart and being effective. These are different things and they shouldn't be confused. And this is the reason why smart people remain poor.